Let's take a look at the locations module in JobPro. Now, the location can be used for multiple options. Let's create a new location and I'll show you. First of all, let's treat a location as a stock location. So we can call it stock location 1. And we use this location for obviously storing products. In setup, you can specify the different types of locations that you have. So let's say this is a warehouse. And also, the stock usage at this location is for sell purposes. You could also set this to be rent or loan use. In other words, that you store items like equipment, tools, etc. that you use for rental or loan use, maybe on jobs, for doing repairs or renting out to customers. Or also a location stock usage point of view could be internal use. In other words, it's your own internal assets, computers, any other equipment and items that you want to track by serial number. So let's say sell use here, and you can give it a description as well. You can also link a location to a company and an address. So a location could, for example, be a supplier's location where the supplier stores your stock. And we could then link this to a supplier. But let's just cancel out of this. So let's say this is an internal stock location. Down the bottom of the screen we'll see a list of any stock currently at that location, and we've got other information like notes and communications relating to this location and other details as well that you can enter in here. Now, you usually won't be actually accessing a location from within the locations module. This is really just for setting up locations, especially from a stock point of view. So if you're storing products at that location, you primarily use that location from the products module. So for example, here's a particular item, and if we look at the stock tab, we can see that this item is stored in multiple locations and has quantities there. So we can do transfers between locations. Also, we can add in stock into that location or into a specific location, like an opening balance or when you do stock takes. But also on receiving goods on purchase orders and any area in the system that either increases or decreases stock into the system. If you have multiple locations in JobPro for a stock point of view, well then you'll be specifying on a PO, for example, what location is going to be the incoming location for those items. Now there's a separate video tutorial in relation to stock control and tracking quantities in stock, and also a separate video tutorial in relation to the products module. So we don't need to get into too much details here in relation to locations. But this is the primary area of stock locations use in the products module. Okay, so let's go back into locations. So just to recap, from a stock point of view, a location could be anything like an internal location, a warehouse, an office, a demo room, for example, or an external location linked to a supplier where you need to track your stock at that supplier's location and maybe decrease stock from there, doing stock transfers or shipping directly from that location. So that's the first main use of the locations module from a point of view of stock, whether it's sellable stock or your own assets that you use on jobs for rental use or just in general using on those jobs or tasks where you book them in as resources. So the second option for locations is that you can treat a location as a bookable resource. It could be a meeting room, a studio, an office, or absolutely anything that you rent out. A house, a building, for example. So if we create a new record here, and we call it Studio 2, and in here we could specify studio, for example, where you'd have in setup you'd have put in a studio type. but we can override that. And we're also specifying that this item is a bookable item. And you can see that when we've turned that on, the Bookings tab becomes active. Okay, so in here then, we can leave this blank if we like. And basically it's not relevant to stock use. But you can actually use a location that's used for bookings also as a stock location if you want it. For example, if you had a studio and you're like an AV company, you might also have stock at that location that you rent out. So the location record might have dual purposes. But let's just say this is a resource type bookable location. We could then specify the address for that location if needs be. But on the Bookings tab, we can then set the rate per hour if we're renting out this, in this case, studio, or the rate per day, or just a rate per booking, for example. And also you can see in here any resource bookings for this specific location. So you can book a location like any resource on a job or on a task. So if you've already booked this item, you can see it in here and the status of that resource booking as well. So let's create a job from this location. So basically this will create a booking job. Then we can specify who the customer is. So in this case we could be just booking in the hire of a room, for example. And there on the resources tab on the job screen it shows the studio. Purpose could be rent, for example, and we can put in a set of dates. It might be just a single date. Okay, so it's telling us here that basically the job dates don't match the dates from the resource booking. So we can click update and that will update the job dates at the top. Okay, so also in relation to this booking, we could add contacts or assets or any items that are used in relation to the rental of this room as well. So there's a lot more functionality covered in other video tutorials relating to resources and jobs. You also have the ability of just creating a job from scratch or from a customer screen and adding a location from within here. So you don't need to do it from the location record itself. On a job you can book in multiple resources. So you could have multiple rooms, multiple people, multiple assets being used or booked in as resources on a job. And you have exactly the same functionality in the tasks module. So we have a look at a task, and on the resources tab we could use this functionality, for example, to manage a meeting. So let's create a new task. We'll say meeting. And for this meeting we can then specify who are the contacts and what's the location for this meeting. So we could add in multiple contacts. And also, as you're adding in resources on a booking, depending on the dates and times of that task, it'll display only the available people or assets or locations that are available for that specific date and time. So it's always useful putting in the date and time first. So that way you can't easily double book a room or a contact, for example. You can see here now we've selected 2 people that are already booked in for other jobs or tasks for this particular day. And if you hover over the clash, you can then see that this person is actually on holidays from the 24th to 30th of June. So that needs to be updated so that they're not basically booked in on this meeting. And the same with the other person. They're working on a job for 3 days or 4 days here. So this is a good visual way of making sure if people are available for, in this case, a meeting. But also, if we click on add location, we can add in then a location linked to a task. So this could be like a meeting room, for example, in the case of this. So if we go back into locations, we can now see that this location has been assigned to a job, and it's also been assigned to a task as well. From the screen we can also either view the job by clicking on the arrow, view the task linked to that booking by clicking on the arrow, or alternatively we can click on these arrows to view the booking details that are linked to the relevant job or task. And in here then we can set the charge out rates, for example per hour. It'll put in quantity of 100 or a sell price of 100. And if we'd put in day or times on this, it would automatically put in the quantity. So let's say that this one is a per day booking, and we got then 500, and we put in a quantity of 1 day. And you can also invoice out from the job itself for any chargeable costs or resources like this location. And when you do that, it'll flag the billed checkbox as invoiced out. So they're the two primary uses of locations: for stock and storage use, and for resource use like meeting rooms, offices and studios. Also, from a stock point of view, if you do have multiple stock locations, then for each identity that you have set up in the system, so an identity is basically like a multi-company feature, except you're sharing all identities in the one system. And in my company you'll set up all your identities. Each identity needs to have a default location in and a default location out, so that every time you do a purchase order or maybe a shipping record or anything that affects stock, if you've got multiple stock locations, it will default to the location in or location out based on the identity of that record. So let's say you're doing a shipping record to a customer, and the identity for that customer is a specific identity like the New York office or the New York branch or the London branch or whatever it might be. Well, then it defaults to that location out for that identity, and that's where the stock is going to come from. And you also have the ability to control if users can change the default location in and out throughout the system for the identities that are used automatically. So there's full control over the movement of goods and from what stores or warehouses or locations goods move either in or out from. If you've only got one stock location, well then as a default, when you get the system, it'll create a main stock location, and you can either set the main stock location to each identity as you're creating them, but it also updates or sets the location into those records anyway. So if we have a quick look at an example, let's create a purchase order. And in here, it's defaulted to Identity Soft Touch Technologies, because we've only got one identity in this example. You could have multiple companies in here, or multiple stores or branches. You can specify in setup what you call an identity, like a branch or an office or a store, etc. But even with one identity, you can still have multiple locations within that one identity or one building. So here, for example, we might say that the stock location is not going to be the main location, but the stock location 1. So as we add items to this PO, we'll put in, say, a quantity of 5. When we receive these items, then this item will increase by 5 at this stock location. So let's put in a supplier as well. Now, we can receive goods in multiple ways by just changing the status of the PO to be received, or type in here a quantity. So let's just even part receiving, we'll put in 3. Now this item is tracked by serial numbers, so we can auto-generate the serial numbers in here, or we can enter in our own serial numbers. So let's just click on generate just to auto-generate it quickly. So now that item will have increased by 3 at this particular stock location. So let's have a quick look. If we go into that product record itself by just clicking on the arrow here, we're brought into the products module, and then we can see at the main stock location we've got stock then at that area. And if we look at the general tab for this item, we can see the most recent product movement is that on a purchase order we received a quantity of 3. So there's a lot more functionality relating to stock quantities and tracking stock covered in a separate video tutorial, but that's just a quick idea of how locations tie into stock locations, locations for storing your own assets, or for items that are used as rental items or loan items on jobs to rent out to customers, but also locations from a bookable point of view as resources like meeting rooms, studios, and so on.